Hi, my name is Michael Andrew, and I'm about to give you your free tutorial on the brand new Canon 90D. Congratulations on your purchase. It is a very powerful and complex camera. If you're coming from another system, you're going to want to check out the table of contents below in the description. Depending on your browser, you can go Control F or Command F, type in the topic that you're interested in, and if we have a chapter marker for it, click the time code next to it, and it'll jump you to that section of the course. If you are brand new to photography, I have to give you a word of warning. This is a reference video to the operation of the camera only. We're going to be talking about how to use different controls and what the buttons that are named and what they do. It is not enough for you to go out and take great images right away. I always tell all of my students in the beginning, I was so frustrated, I almost broke my camera, I almost gave up. There are about 7 or 8 things you really need to have under your belt to take great images consistently. And this is where beginners struggle, is sometimes they get lucky, and sometimes they don't, and they're wondering, what am I doing wrong? I have a systematic approach, and we have a Canon 90D crash course in production right now. That includes a 1-hour crash course on the basics of photography, lighting, composition. We have a section on strobe photography. We talk about the different kinds of video shooting, and then I take the camera and I show you the real world shooting situations such as sports, in landscape, in portraits, absolutely packed with information. So if you find this video helpful and you want to get the most out of your camera as quickly as possible, check for the link in the description. If it's not yet published, I'll point that to my blog and you can leave your name and your email address. We will reach out to you as soon as it's ready. My friend Tony Northup also has an excellent book called Stunning Digital Photography. That's more about the basics of photography. It covers it in much more depth. My courses are more about speed. Tony's a good friend of mine, but he did not ask me to share that with you. I just think it is a great resource. In any event, we have a tremendous amount of information to cover. So let's get started. Let's take a look at all the external buttons and controls on our Canon 90D. This is the shutter button. It has 2 positions. The first is a halfway depression, which will engage the camera's focusing systems. The second is a full depression, which will actually take the picture. We want to teach our finger to feel the difference between these 2 positions. The first is like this spongy resistance. And this is important because sometimes we are just going to want to focus the camera, and other times we are definitely going to want to take the picture. Just behind the shutter button, we have our main dial. I like to refer to it as the primary selector for a very good reason I will demonstrate later on in the video. You will notice that it rotates to the left and right, and its main purpose is to change our exposure settings. On the back of the camera, you will notice a big round control wheel. This is referred to as the quick control dial by Canon, but I like to call it the secondary selector. It's easy to miss that there are actually 3 separate controls here. The first is a ring, which rotates to the right and left. We use this wheel to change our exposure settings. Just inside of that, we have a directional pad that we can push up, down, left and right, as well as each of the 4 diagonals. It's very useful for selecting menus and navigating through certain screens. In the center of this control, we have the set button, which acts as an enter button would on a computer. It's very useful when selecting or confirming certain menu options. On the top left of the camera, you will notice a round dial with a bunch of letters on it. This is our mode dial. It is going to allow us to determine the behavior of the camera and how much help it is giving us. You will notice that there is a pin in the center which must be pressed in order to rotate it. This is to prevent accidental bumping. Just behind and to the left of our shutter button, we have the auto focus area selector. I like to call this the cluster button. It is going to allow us to choose different types of focusing squares when shooting. If you were to grip the camera with your right hand, next to your right ring finger, you will notice a very elusive button on the bottom of the camera. It's very easy to miss. This is referred to as the depth of field preview button. Its job is to stop the aperture blades down so we can see the depth of field in real time. On the opposite side of the lens, that big oval button we see is the lens release button. We are going to press this every time we take a lens off of the camera. As a side note, when you put a new lens on, be sure to rotate the lens until you hear that clicking sound. That will designate that the lens is locked into position. Above the lens release, we have the Force Flash button. This will activate our built-in flash to fire, and it will also allow us to gain access to certain controls to change the performance of the flash. On the left side of the camera, under some rubberized grips, we have a microphone and headphone jack. We have a wired remote terminal. We have a USB port as well as a mini HDMI port. On the right side of the camera, we have our SD card slot, and below it, we have our battery compartment. Next to the mode dial, we have our power switch, which obviously we need to turn on for the camera to work. And below it, we have the menu button and the information button. The menu button is going to give us access to the deep menu of the camera. There are a ton of settings in here, and we will briefly cover the most important a little later in the video. Pressing the info button repeatedly will allow us to toggle through different screens, whether we're shooting in live view or if we want to access the Q screen while using the optical viewfinder. It's also useful when we're playing back images to get certain types of shooting information. To the right of the viewfinder, we have our live view and video record mode button. This is a rotating switch that has a white notch on it. When pointing to the white camera, we will be activating live view by pressing the start and stop button. Live view allows us to use our back monitor to preview the shot, the composition, the exposure, even before we take the picture. When we rotate this switch to the red camera icon, we are turning the camera into video recording mode, and pressing start and stop will begin and end video recording. To the top right of the viewfinder, this little knob here is referred to as the diopter adjustment. This is going to change the optics of the viewfinder, which is fantastic for those of us which use corrective eyewear. Below the live view video record switch, we have the joystick, which is going to be critical when changing our focusing squares as well as navigating certain menus. Below and to the right of it, we have the Q button, which will allow us to change our camera settings on our back monitor depending on what screen we are currently in. To review your images after shooting, press the Playback button. We can swipe to the left and right with our finger on our touch-sensitive screen, and we can also use the secondary control wheel to navigate. I'll demonstrate this a little later. We also have the garbage can icon, and as you guessed correctly, this is going to allow us to delete images. To the right of that, we have the lock switch, which we can designate certain features to not change when this switch is shifted to the left. This prevents accidental bumping, things of that nature. On the top right of the camera, where our right thumb would rest, we have three buttons. The first is the autofocus on button, which will also engage our focusing systems when we press this. This is particularly useful for those of our sport shooting friends who prefer back button focus, and I will briefly cover this a little later. Next to it, we have the exposure lock button, which, when we are in the program, aperture priority, or shutter priority modes, will lock our current exposure for a few seconds and allow us to recompose the shot and take it without our exposure settings changing. When we are using flash, this becomes the flash exposure lock button, which will fire a pre-flash, meter the scene, and again allow us to shoot within a few seconds without the camera changing its settings. On the far right, we have our auto focus point selector, which, when we press this, it will allow us to change our focusing squares when looking through the viewfinder. Also important to note, these two magnifying glasses just below them. What those designate is that when we are in a playback mode, or when we are in certain live view modes, we can use these buttons to zoom in and out of our images, as well as to zoom in certain stages of live view to get tack sharp focus. On the top of the camera, we have an LCD display and 5 buttons. The button on the far right is a light, so if you're in a dark shooting situation and you just want to see the LCD, tap that light and it'll light up and allow you to see what's going on. The other 4 buttons correspond to the LCD feature below them. Starting from the left, we have autofocus. The second one is our drive modes. The third is the ISO. The fourth is the metering mode. And the way this works is that when you press one of these buttons and rotate the primary selector, you will be able to scroll through different icons, allowing you to see which setting you are changing it to. So for example, if I wanted to change my ISO, I would press the ISO button and rotate the main dial to my new ISO setting, and that's how those four buttons correspond with the information below them. Below these four features, we have our shutter speed. And this number here, even displayed in whole numbers, is really a fraction, and then we have our aperture. In the brackets, you will see a number designating the number of shots remaining on our memory card with the current quality and file size. Below these, we have our exposure compensation bar, and on the far right, we have our Wi-Fi indicator, as well as our current battery life. It's also critically important for me to note that our articulating monitor is touch sensitive. It is a joy and a pleasure to use. It makes life a lot easier when changing certain camera settings. So that's an overview of all the buttons and controls on our Canon 90D. I want to promise you that if you practice, the day will come that you have complete control over your camera. You will feel confident and comfortable when shooting. For now, I know there might be some confusion, so come back anytime you want and we'll review it again together. For the rest of the video, let's talk about the major features and controls of our Canon 90D. Our Canon 90D is referred to as an APS-C sensor, and if you notice, we have this lens release lock here. When we have a lens on, we're going to have to push this before rotating the lens off. You know, also notice we have this little dimple right here. This is going to line up with the red dot on the lens mount itself. If you have a lens designed for APS-C sensors, you're going to look for the white dot, and you're going to line up the white dot on your lens with the white dot on the lens mount. I have a full frame lens, which is a red dot. I'm going to line that up with the red dot. Now you can definitely use full frame lenses on your APS-C camera. I have, I think, over 10 EF lenses. I use them all the time, but the lens that I use more than any is the 24-70 2.8. I'm about to put it on. Something you'll notice is that underneath the lens cap cover of every lens, it will tell you the filter thread size of the lens mount. And this is very important when you're using filters and things of that nature, so you can know the size of that, but that's underneath the lens cap. So depending on the lens that you have, you're going to line up the dot, in this case, red dot on red dot, and I'm going to rotate it clockwise as I face it until it locks. You're going to hear it click. There's the click, and you can know it's on all the way. Sometimes if you put it on and it's not on all the way, they can pop off. But again, if you want to remove the lens, push the lens release in before doing so. So when we're talking about memory cards for our Canon 90D, it's important that you get minimum a card that has this little symbol on here that says U3. Class U3 designation is a sustained write speed for 4K video. So if you get some old memory card out of the bottom of your desk and you just throw it in your camera, you may not be getting the maximum performance out of your camera that you could. On here, 170 megabytes per second. But this, for the video, is super important. I like the SanDisk Extreme Pros. This is a 64 gigabyte card, so plenty of images. Something to keep in mind, however, is that this is a Class UHS-1 card, and they make Class UHS-2 cards. They're a little bit more expensive, but their write speed is obviously faster. You can see it's 300 megabytes per second. This is a larger capacity. I usually tell my students to get the best memory card that you can afford. I've seen the prices on these 64s come down quite a bit, and we'll put those in the description below if you guys want to check those out. You can get away with quite a bit with the UHS-1 class card, but the highest performing ones right now at the time of this recording are the UHS-2, and this is a great card. I use it in a lot of my tests. I'll be posting some sports testing videos, and you'll see the buffer test in terms of how the camera does, and much of that depends on the card. In any event, when you're ready to put the card in, you're going to notice we have this icon where it's showing that we have this little cut corner here, and that's the way it goes into the camera. When you hear it click, you can lock the door, and you're going to be ready to go. When we're ready to put our charged battery in, we're going to just move this tab down, And we're going to match the shape of the battery to the grip with the pins on the top. Slides right in. To unlock it, you're going to slide this white release here, and it comes right out. Definitely recommend getting at least one extra battery, sometimes two. Canon batteries actually last really long, but at least have one extra battery. Let's turn our cameras on, and we're going to go ahead and set up the date. We can rotate on the wheel. You notice I'm pushing set. I can also do it here, up and down here. We'll have to turn that beep off. We don't have daylight savings in Hawaii, so we're good to go. When all that's set up, we're gonna hit OK. If you don't have your camera in hand, please pause the video, grab it so you can follow along in the LCD information we're about to talk about. And there's also many important symbols and numbers. I'm going to explain what they are. This is going to make a lot of sense once we go through it together. Something important to note is that the camera's on right now and we don't see anything on our back monitor. When you are shooting sports or fast moving subjects, you are going to want to be in this mode, and you want to look through the optical viewfinder. Use the focusing systems in this mode. They're going to be far superior to any live view focusing. So this is the optical shooting, and when I turn this monitor on in the back, this is referred to as live view. Basically what's happening is the mirror is going to flip up and we get a live view of what's coming through the lens. In this mode, the one you see right now without the screen, we are looking through the lens through a pentaprism in the camera that bounces down and off a mirror. Far superior for fast moving subjects. It's a really great focusing system. So just keep that in mind. If you ever go sports shooting and things of that nature, this is the setup that you want. When we are talking about live view, in many of the icons we're going to see, however, we are going to push this start stop button. This is going to put us into live view for stills. That's what the white camera indicates. When we want to shoot video, we can point to the red video camera, and that puts us in a video shooting mode. But we're going to talk about stills for now. You can notice that it kicks us out. And there are a couple really important numbers. I'm going to change the mode dial here to manual. We get this preview, we'll turn off in just a second. You can see it's kind of dark. That's fine for now. But these numbers on the bottom of the screen that you're going to see, these are the most important settings that you can keep your eye on when you are shooting stills. This is our shutter speed. It is designated in fractions, so 1/50th of a second. Sometimes on some cameras it'll just be a number. So as you look through the viewfinder, for example, it might be something different depending on the camera you're using. Aperture refers to how wide the opening of the lens is in terms of its diameter. This is one of those lessons that we'll talk about on the crash course where I'll give you the basis of photography. This last number over here is the ISO. So shutter speed, aperture, and the ISO. The ISO deals with how much boost the sensor is going to get. The easiest way to think of it is how sensitive the sensor is. If you really want to get into it, it's an electronic boost that actually happens after the picture is taken. We'll be talking a little bit about that later on in the video. But if you look through the viewfinder, you are going to see similar numbers in the viewfinder. You're going to see your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. So those three numbers, critically important, but we will talk about them in depth in the exposure lesson. This funny bracket right here is the exposure compensation bracket. It helps determine the brightness of the image. We'll also be talking about that. Up in the top left-hand corner, we have our mode indicator. It's currently in the manual mode. The mode is essentially how the camera helps us determine the shutter speed or the aperture. We can get a little bit of help from the camera, or we can get a lot of help from the camera. We'll be talking about that in a moment. But this symbol here is what shooting mode we are currently in. Anytime you see a number between brackets, it's typically the number of shots remaining, depending on the capacity of our memory card, as well as whether we are shooting in JPEG, RAW, things of that nature. And you'll notice that this number here after it, that refers to how many shots we can take consecutively before the camera starts to slow down its buffer. It's very important for sport shooters. We have the remaining life of our battery. We also have the Q, or the quick mode. And this is our touch shutter indicator here. So if we wanted to touch on the screen, you'll notice that we get a little focusing box. The camera is focusing where we touch, and it's taking a picture. To me, this is super annoying, so I leave it on disable. So this is just the general shooting screen with general information. Something I want you to do right now is press the info button and watch what happens. As we push the info button, we are toggling on and off different types of information. We'll be talking about all these in just a second, but this is pretty important if you ever get to a screen and you're wondering, hey, where'd all that other information go? Histograms help us know the relative brightness of an image. Let's talk about some of these other guys and how to change them. We have our tracking mode, we'll talk about that later. But when we press the Q button, you're going to notice we get 2 columns of information on the side, and we get 1 row on the bottom. So each of these columns are different camera settings that we can choose from. The row on the bottom are different selections for the highlighted choice. So if we're talking about white balance, you can see all the different white balance settings we have on the bottom of the camera. You can choose through those. So just keep that in mind. These are our selections, and this is options within each selection. We're going to be talking about a lot of these in the video. We will talk about the real world examples in the 90D crash course, but real quickly so you know what they are. These are our auto focusing modes. I have to keep on pushing this. Oh, and you'll notice we have a designated Q button right here we can just push to turn that on or off. So the first one here, I like to refer to these as clusters. These are the types of boxes we can use for focusing. We have our autofocus mode, also referred to as autofocus operation. We have our drive mode, which is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way, whether it's a single shot or multiple shots. When we take a look at these on the bottom here, let's go through these real quick. We have a single shot. We have our high-speed continuous burst. Our 90D will shoot at 10 frames per second, which is awesome. We have a low-speed continuous burst, which is not as many frames per second. We have our self timer, 10 seconds. We have our 2-second self timer. And we have our self timer continuous. This is basically allowing the camera to take multiple images. If we press the info button, we can determine how many of those images it'll take when the timer gets out of time. And those are the drive modes. This is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. Metering modes we will discuss. This is how the camera measures light. We have our image quality, which deals with whether we're shooting JPEG or RAW. And there's different sizes and compressions. We have our white balance. We'll be talking about this in detail in this lesson. We have our picture styles, which is essentially how the camera bakes or creates JPEG images. And there's a lot to choose from. If you're brand new to shooting, this is probably a little bit too much information. I would say start off on the auto picture style. It's also going to allow us to come in here and tweak different parts of this recipe in terms of the sharpness, and how detailed it is, to things like contrast, saturation, color tone. Again, probably a little bit too much information for pure beginners, but it's there if you need it. Very handy for videography. Next, we have our auto lighting optimizer, which applies as general contrast to the image. It's fine when you're first getting started. And then finally, we have the creative filters, which I am not a huge fan of. I think it's a little gimmicky and I never use them. So that is the quick screen if you ever want to jump to it and tweak some of those camera settings. Something else I need to point out is that when you see these gray highlights, you can touch, even for shutter speed and aperture, touch and drag, because we have a touch screen. The screen's amazing. Canon has the best touch screens by far. It's not even close. And it makes it it's a more enjoyable shooting experience, in my opinion. I think it is. So that is the quick overlay screen as we're shooting. If we want that information displayed, we can just press the info button. There it is. There's our histogram, and there's no information if you want it. You get it out of the way. Something else that's really important, when we use the full sensor, we're shooting at a 2:3 aspect ratio, and this is 16:9 when we go to video. So we crop a little bit of the top and the bottom. You're going to notice that some of the Q items have changed when we come into the Q menu. we have our resolutions right here on the bottom. 4K, Full HD, and we'll be talking a little bit about these when we get into the menus, but the number below it is the frame rate. So 4K at 30 frames per second, and when we touch that item, we get the resolution of the video, how many pixels wide by how many pixels tall by how many frames per second. It also gives us our maximum recording time, which is 30 minutes. And we see some of these other frame rates, 60 frames at HD, which is 1920 by 1080, 30. We have a more compressed setting, and then we even have the 720 resolution. One of the big questions about the 90D is where's the 24 frames per second, which is common on all cameras. It's a really good question. When we come into this next one, Movie Digital Image Stabilization tells the camera to stabilize the footage, but to do it in a digital way, not an optical way. And the way it does this is it crops out. You're going to lose resolution when you do it. It's not something I generally recommend. We have our volume for our headphones. Very important when we plug a headset in while we're recording video. We're going to do a lot of video shooting on the crash course. So something that I use all the time is headphones, and we can adjust our volume. And then some of these other things are what we've already seen. We have our white balance, picture styles, which is more important for video because video is a form of JPEG and we want to get it right going into the camera. So white balance is more important for video. Picture styles are more important for video. A lot of videographers will turn their contrast and sharpness down and they'll add it back in post. And then we have our auto lighting optimizer. So keep that in mind that the Q overlay, the quick information, is different between the video and stills for live view. When you want to record video, you're going to push the start and stop button, and we'll get this indicator right here that tells us we're recording. We also get this light. Something else I need to show you is that when we are not in live view, when we get to this dark screen and you push your info button, you can get our level. You can see that we're not quite level here, and I need to tilt the camera. See if we can fix that real quick until it turns green. So now the camera is level. And as we continue to push the info button, we get this black, I call it the black Q screen, simply because it's the quick screen for optical shooting. It's a little bit different. Very powerful, very fast way to change your camera settings. I've loved having this screen, especially when I'm shooting in the dark and I want to see my, I can't see the LCD on the top. So let's go through these real quick. Now, to unlock this, you'll notice that as I'm trying to tap, it's like, no, you got to press the Q button to unlock it. You can press this one or this one. And the moment we do, we get this orange highlight. The way this works is that whatever is highlighted, if you rotate your primary or your secondary control wheels, you can change that setting directly, or you can tap on it and you can come into the menu, touch and drag. You can touch to jump. It's very fast. It's very easy to use. It's very intuitive once you know how to unlock this and change the settings. So going through these real quick, we've seen these all already. We have our mode, shutter speed, aperture, ISO. We have our exposure compensation bar. We'll be talking about that in a moment. We have our flash exposure compensation. You can see that we're getting this little prompt, and there's a way to turn this off in the menu that I'll show you in just a second. We have our Wi-Fi indicator. In fact, this is driving me crazy already. So let's go into the menu and we'll turn those off. So those two modes that are driving me crazy, the mode guide, every time you turn the mode dial, you get a little prompt. So this thing right here, to me, it kind of slows my shooting down and I don't want to see that. So I'm going to turn that off. And then the feature guide, I'm also going to turn off. So now when I change my mode dial, it just changes. This is so much nicer. And then when we come into the Q button, we don't get these prompts overlaying. So this is our Wi-Fi Bluetooth. Again, our picture styles, white balance shift, which is something I rarely do. We have our auto light optimizer, custom controls that I'm going to show you more of in just a second. We have our focusing mode, our focusing cluster. We have our metering modes, our drive modes, and then we have the quality, which deals with JPEG RAW, and then the file size. Something super cool you should be aware of, it's easiest to access right here, is the custom control menu. You can press set to select it. This is going to give us a map of the camera. It's going to show us the button highlighted on this map, and then it's going to tell us how to change the features of that, how that button works. So if we wanted to go with back button focusing, for example, and we wanted to remove autofocus from the shutter button, we would come in here and select metering. I know this is probably a lot for pure beginners. Just know this is where we can customize different buttons. And as we scroll through this, it's saying, hey, you don't have anything on your set button. What do you want your set button to do when you're shooting? And it gives us all these options. In the beginning, leave your camera in the default. It's going to make it easier as I'm teaching you. And after you go through this lesson, after you go through the crash course, when you get to those shooting options that you do often, then you're going to want to come in and tweak these. So you can see you can tweak several of the buttons. It's very nice. And that is the cue screen. So let's come back out. I'm going to tap shutter button. We also have our battery life, our Wi-Fi activity, Bluetooth activity, and the number of shots remaining. And that is the black cue screen when using the optical viewfinder. If we toggle the info button, it turns off again. Real quick, let's talk about the touch screen during playback. Obviously, this is going to behave much as a smartphone. So you can scroll through your images left and right. If you wanted to zoom in, you could pinch out. We're going to have a sports shooting section on the crash course. So we'll talk about all the different settings and different applications. If we continue to pinch in, we can zoom out, and you can see we can get tons of these images, and we can just touch and drag. It's kind of a much faster way if you're looking for a specific image. You can see how small it gets, right? Portrait shoots, all that stuff is on the crash course. It's good stuff. Double tap into it. This is the slow sync shooting stuff. Here, this is the portrait session. So obviously we're going to be talking about portraits and things of that nature, but very intuitive, very quick and easy to use. Get used to pinching in and out depending on how fast you want to jump through. You can also use the wheel if you want to continue doing that. And that is how you use the touch screen for playback. Something else I need to point out before we get into the exposure lesson, this is absolutely critical, is that you come into your deep menu, red tab, page 2, and you make sure your exposure simulation is set to enable. And by default, your camera should be set to enable. But if it's not, none of what I'm about to show you will make any sense at all, because this turns off exposure prediction. We want the exposure prediction and simulation on. Disable only when you're using strobe in a studio setting, for example. At all other times, I'm on enable. If you haven't gotten your camera, definitely this is a lesson you're going to want to have it in hand. It's not going to be nearly as powerful as when you can't do these exercises as I'm walking you through this. So grab your camera, and we're going to start talking about the exposure settings. We're going to talk about a little bit about the modes that we're shooting in. There's really, when you're shooting, there's really 4 modes you should know. There is the P mode, AV, TV, and M. We'll be talking about each of these in just a second. There's also the green dummy mode. It's designated with a green A and a green box with a little plus sign, and I refer to this as the dummy mode. Literally, the camera is going to be making all of the decisions for you, with the exception of your quality, maybe your flash, and you get these little, these little things that you can do with your filters. You didn't buy this camera to treat it like, a smartphone. This is a very powerful tool. So the advice that I give in the beginning is to really focus on these 4 modes: P, TV, AV, and M. Before we get into this, absolutely make sure that you are not on auto ISO. I want you to turn your ISO to like 400, maybe 800. Auto ISO we'll talk about near the end. This stuff, we want it turned off, otherwise you will not be able to see the very important things I'm about to show you. Now, the easiest way for me to explain this is to talk about aperture priority mode first. In aperture priority mode, we determine the aperture. Watch. So I'm going to take my primary finger, number 1, and I'm going to put it up here on the primary selector. This is why I call it the primary selector. And you're going to notice that as I rotate that wheel, the aperture is changing. Aperture setting is changing, right? So your primary finger changes the primary setting. Now our 90D is giving us an exposure preview. It is telling us how bright or how dark the image is going to be before we take it. And that's what the word exposure means. It means brightness. It's just a fancy word for brightness. So the question you should be asking yourself is that as you are changing the aperture, if I'm making the aperture wider, or then I'm making the aperture smaller, why isn't this image changing brightness? It's a very curious thing, and we can find that answer out by tapping the shutter button. When we tap the shutter button, we can see the shutter speed. And when we rotate the aperture control wheel, which is our primary setting, we can see what's happening is that the camera is changing the shutter speed in the background. It is compensating for the changes in aperture to give an even exposure. And that is the heart of the matter with aperture priority. We choose the aperture, the camera chooses the shutter speed. Now, a very important thing that you're going to notice as you are shooting is sometimes you're going to take a picture and it's either going to be too dark or it's going to be too bright. So let's say you want to make the image a little bit brighter. The short answer is you're going to touch on this exposure compensation bar, and we can push over one little click, maybe 2, maybe 3. Let me show you the difference between an even exposure, something like that, and now let's turn this up to 1. And when I play those back, this is the even exposure and this is the brighter exposure. And that is the short answer. So if you want to change your images to be brighter, you would want to move this little tick mark to the right. You can see this little green tick mark moving up. So now it's way bright. If this is the only thing that you come away from on this video, you are well on your way to becoming a great photographer, because this is one of the most used skill sets you will ever have as a photographer. Typically, I don't bump it up that much. It's usually 1 little tick or maybe 2 little ticks, and I'm making the image brighter, right? Let's say hypothetically that we wanted to make the image darker. Well, we would just go in the opposite direction. Let's go to -1. Take a picture. So you can see when we play these back, this was the even exposure, this was a little bit brighter, this was a little bit darker. Let's say we want to go even darker than this. Okay, no problem. Let's just turn it down all the way to -3. Take that picture, and you can see how dark it is. So what I recommend is pausing the video and practicing this right now. Take an even exposure, come into your exposure control wheel, turn it up a little bit brighter, turn it down, take those 3 images and compare them. It's a very important skill set. There is a longer answer to this that I'm going to explain, and I'm going to give you some very critical pieces of information that you're going to have to make second nature. In the beginning, I always tell my students, almost all of them, start off in aperture priority mode. This is where you should begin to learn. One thing you want to keep an eye on is to make sure your shutter speed is always at least 1/60th of a second. If your shutter speed is slower than 1/60th of a second, your image has a chance of being blurry, because as you shoot with long exposures, the camera is moving a little bit. And this is the bane of beginning photographers, is that why are all my pictures so blurry? Almost always, you probably use the slow shutter speed. So this is something I'm always peeking at, is the shutter speed when I am shooting in aperture priority mode. Something that's a bit of a shock is when I tell my students when I'm shooting professionally in a non-studio environment, almost always on aperture priority mode, exactly like I just showed you, something like that. And the reason is Sometimes these shooting conditions change. You'll be in a church and it's dark. Here comes the bride and groom. Now we're in the lobby and now we're outside. Well, those are 3 different lighting conditions. And I don't want to have to fumble around with my shutter speed. I'm going to let the camera take control. Same thing when I'm shooting sports. I dial in my aperture and I sneak a peek. For sports, typically though, I like this to be 1/500th or 1/1000th or 1/2000th of a second. Now, something that is very critical about how this works is the camera is also measuring how much light comes into the camera. I'm going to prove it. You should prove it to yourself too. I want you to take your hand, tap that shutter button, and slowly move your hand in front of the camera and watch the shutter speed change. Can you see that? So what's happening is the camera is saying, hey, I noticed it's gotten dark in here, and it wants to use a long shutter speed to take care of that. And the moment I pull my hand away, it goes back to a fast shutter speed. So what's happening is the camera is constantly measuring how much light is coming through the lens. So this is the philosophy of use when we're talking about shooting with aperture priority mode. When I use those terms, philosophy of use, that means this is something you really should focus on learning and making second nature. Now, I want to talk about the longer answer for exposure compensation. You are going to notice that there are 3 tick marks for every 1 unit. See that? Each of those tick marks represent 1/3 of a single stop. You're probably wondering what a stop is. We'll talk about it on the crash course in the beginner section. A single stop is twice the amount of light as the setting before it. So what's happening here, we have this diamond home plate, which is an even exposure. But when I turn this up to 1, what we're telling the camera is, camera, we want twice the amount of light coming in. So the camera knows that we're giving it some basic instruction, and at this point, it would shoot all the exposures with a shutter speed that would make it 1 stop brighter. And that's the same if we go to 2 stops, which would be 4 times the amount of light, and 3 stops, and so on and so forth. And it also works in the opposite direction. We're shooting at home plate even. If we go to -1 stops, we're telling the camera we want half as much light, and it should use a shutter speed that is twice as fast. And again, we could do the same thing if we go to -2 stops, and that's why it's getting darker. We can prove this mathematically, taking 1/125th plus 1/125th of a second. That gives us 2 125ths, which if we simplify that, it's about 1/60th of a second. So that's what's happening. Twice as long shutter speed. So now I'm going to ask you, if we go to +2, what would you expect the shutter speed to be? What is twice as long as 1/60th? Well, we can do the math. 1/60th plus 1/60th is 2/60ths. And we simplify that, should be 1/30th. There it is. I want you to do the last one on your own. What is twice as long as 1/30th of a second? If you said 1/15th of a second, you are absolutely correct. This is something that I struggled with for a long time, and you're getting it in your first day of lessons. You're way ahead of where I was. It took me a good year and a half to figure this out, way back in 2003. So let's go in the opposite direction. 1/125th of a second. We want a shutter speed that's twice as fast, twice the speed, faster. If you said 1/250th of a second, you're absolutely correct. And by now, I'm sure you're getting the hang of it. It should be 1/500th. And the last one, obviously, should be 1/1000th of a second. Oh, it's close. It's one of those things where it's metering a little bit darker. It should be 1/1000th. So that is the heart of the matter when we're talking about exposure compensation, this bar. And there's one in the viewfinder too. When you look through the viewfinder, you'll see one as well. It works the same way. When you're shooting, looking through the viewfinder, you can change it by tapping on your shutter button and just rotating the secondary control wheel. That's why we call it secondary. Your primary changes the main one, and your thumb changes the secondary setting. That's what's happening. This will become second nature to you as you continue to shoot and improve and get more experience. You'll know how to use the modes. You'll know by experience how much to shift it by. And that is probably like 60 to 70% of your shooting right there, okay, in terms of changing exposure, aperture priority mode, just changing those tick marks. So now that we know that, let's take a look at this in shutter priority mode, TV mode, time value. What we're telling the camera is that we want to determine with our primary finger the time, the shutter speed, and as the secondary control, the camera is going to designate the aperture. So here's my primary finger. So now I'm changing the shutter speed. Tap the shutter button, and we can see in the aperture is what's changing. Now there's something very interesting that happened here. There's a couple things. You'll notice it respected, it maintained our exposure compensation. We'll turn that back. But there's something else really interesting that happened. Let's pretend you were shooting your son's sporting event and you need a very fast shutter speed, maybe 1/500th or maybe even 1/1000th of a second. And you're going to notice that the screen is getting very dark. Where's the exposure compensation? Canon 90D, we spent all this money on you. Help us out. If we tap the shutter button, you're going to see that the aperture is blinking. When you see this, what the camera is saying is that what we have dialed in exceeds the physical ability of the lens to match it. It can't open wider than 2.8 is what it's complaining. It's crying. It's like, it can't do it. And you're going to have very dark images. If we were to take the picture, yep, pretty dark. That's a problem. So I want you to think about this. If you were in this situation, what would you do? If you said, bump your ISO up, you are absolutely correct. And then as I bump this up, it's becoming brighter and brighter. And now it's kind of maintaining exposure. So if I come back out, now we're at f3.2. So this is going to happen to you a lot. You're going to be in a shooting situation where you need a certain shutter speed and the lens can't open wide enough. You're going to bump your ISO up. Here's the drawback with ISO. I'll demonstrate it. I'm going to turn this way up. Might as well talk about ISO real quick. I'm just going to turn it all the way up for the sake of demonstration. We're going to take a picture of those blinds. And I'm going to zoom in. Let's play that and zoom in. So I'm looking at the blinds. Those are plain, clean blinds. And I don't know if you can see it, but when you look at this edge here on the blind, you can see it's really grainy. And that is the trade-off of ISO, is that as you turn your ISO up, you're going to get more grain. Something else I want to show you is that as you're playing images back, you can also push the info button and get information about your images. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Here's our histogram. Some of our other settings, file size. Very nice. So now let's repeat this with a lower ISO. What heck, we'll go 400. And obviously it's dark, so we're going to change shutter speed. We just want to see what's going on with the ISO. We'll zoom in. We'll look at that line again. See how it's a little out of focus, but see how much cleaner that is? And this is the grainy one. Can you see all the grain in there? How noisy it is? So that's the trade-off with ISO, is that the higher the ISO is, the more brighter your image will be, but you also have more grain. So the question becomes, where's the limit? It really depends on what you're shooting. I've shot portraits at 6400 and sometimes even 12800. It really depends on the colors and where you are presenting it. If you're presenting it on a smartphone, it's usually not a problem. If you're blowing this up to be a poster, that could be a problem. So the short answer is you're going to want to use the lowest ISO possible, depending on your lens and your shutter speed. Sometimes you have to bump it up. That's just life. That's part of learning how to do all this stuff. Just for the sake of quick demonstration, you can see that when I tap the shutter button, the aperture is moving. See it moving around. And when we come in to our exposure compensation bar, you can see that the shutter speed stays fixed and the aperture is what's changing. So shutter priority is the opposite of what aperture priority does. We dial in the shutter speed and the camera dials in the aperture, and it can make adjustments for exposure compensation. Let's talk about program mode. Program mode is sort of like the dummy mode, but it allows us to have exposure compensation changes. We can change our ISO. We can, determine our focusing modes. It's like taking the training wheels off a little bit, if you want to say that. When we tap the shutter button and we rotate our primary selector, you can see we get different combinations of shutter speeds and apertures that we can scroll through. We can also use our exposure compensation using the secondary control wheel. It's getting brighter, and it's making adjustments to both the shutter speed and the aperture. P mode has its time in place, and I believe that time in place is when we put a speed light on. When we put a flash on the camera, P mode is a good place to start because it becomes the handheld mode, and the camera is going to ensure that we're using a relatively fast shutter speed. A mistake a lot of beginners use on Canon cameras is when they put the flash on, they're shooting in aperture priority mode, which uses longer shutter speeds with flash, and a lot of their pictures are blurry. So the short answer is that if you're using a flash, start off in P mode. If you're not using a flash, start off in aperture priority mode. So real quick, let's talk about the manual mode. Manual mode is awesome. It's amazing because it allows us to have complete control over the camera. This is why I love it. Smartphones frustrate me because I don't have complete control over things like the shutter speed unless I have a special app for it or something. But in the manual mode, we dial in the shutter speed, we dial in the aperture, and unless we're on auto ISO, we dial in the ISO. You'll notice that the exposure compensation bar is no longer available to us. Can't even select it. And the reason is there is no exposure compensation in manual mode. We get an exposure preview, and if we change something like the shutter speed, you can see the indicator moving. You would see something similar in the viewfinder. And what this is, it's telling us how under or how overexposed the image is going to be. This becomes a light meter in manual mode. So manual mode is we have complete control over the camera, and the camera is not helping us with any exposure settings. I personally love to shoot in manual mode when I have the time, or if I'm shooting in a studio with strobes, almost always manual. If I am rushed and have very limited amount of time and I'm going through different lighting conditions, almost always on aperture priority mode. And I only really use aperture priority or manual mode in all of my still shooting. So that's something you should be working towards. And that's why I want you to start off on aperture priority mode, is because once you learn this, you're going to have it for the rest of your life. I want to make a side note about the philosophy of use for auto ISO. A lot of people love auto ISO. It's basically turning control over the ISO over to the camera. In certain settings, this is really a lifesaver. And one of those settings would be something like indoor sports photography, where you would go in there and you need maybe a shutter speed of 1/500th or 1/1000th of a second. And you might have your widest aperture on here, and the lighting conditions may change from shot to shot, maybe like MMA or even basketball, depending on the angle. And so as a sports photographer, you do not want to have to change your shutter speed between every shot. You want to focus on the action. You want to focus on the composition and what's happening in the game. Turning it over to auto ISO is awesome because the camera will start making the adjustments itself, and it has improved over the years. So there are situations I do recommend auto ISO. I just don't recommend it to beginners because they tend to lean on it a little too much as a crutch. If you can learn how to dial in your ISOs manually, it's going to give you a lot of benefit over the long run. And then once you become more experienced, you're going to decide whether you want auto ISO or to dial it in manually. So that is an overview of the shooting modes, how to change your exposure, which is image brightness. We talked about how the camera compensates. We talked about the philosophy of use in the exposure compensation. I know it's a lot of information, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let's talk about white balance. Short answer on this is if you are a pure beginner, it's going to be a lot easier for you to set this to auto white balance, let the camera handle it, You have a lot of other things to worry about, like exposure control and composition and focusing. After a certain amount of time, however, you are going to notice that in certain lighting conditions, your images take on maybe more of a magenta or a blue or a little bit more yellow kind of tone. And in those cases, you're probably going to want to adjust your white balance. White balance is more important to set correctly when you're shooting JPEG, because when we're shooting RAW, that color information is saved within the RAW file and we can easily change it. When we're shooting JPEG, a lot of the color information is thrown away and it only saves that which we're using. So when you see this, if you want to check auto white balance, you're going to press the Q button and you're going to see it in the top right-hand column. AWB stands for auto white balance. Sometimes we will see these white information, little indicators. That's telling us a button to press if we don't want to touch on the screen. And in this case, it would be this far right top button. And when we push that, we have the ability to shift between an ambient white balance, which is a little bit more yellow, and then a white priority. I like the white priority a little bit more, but in the beginning, it's just not going to matter. It's not that important. When you start seeing these color shifts, then you're going to want to become more aware of the light conditions you're shooting in. And the idea on this is that the camera wants us to set the icon to whatever environment we're shooting in. So if we're shooting in daylight, we would choose the sun icon. If we were shooting in the shade, we would choose the shade icon. If we were shooting in cloudy conditions, and so on and so forth. And we have tungsten light. You can see how blue it is. We have fluorescent light. It's almost purple. We have flash, which a lot of people don't know should be the same as sun, 5600K. I know it's probably a little bit too much information. We have custom white balance, and we have our Kelvin setting. So I'm trying to give you the short answer. The short answer, if you're a pure beginner, stick with auto white balance. As you become more intermediate and advanced, choose the icon that you're shooting in, or if you notice something's off, try to select the right icon. But I also want to talk about this guy right here, which is our custom white balance. Custom white balance means that we can take a picture of something neutral. It can be gray, it can be white. We take a picture of it and we tell the camera, this is white. And the camera will then take that information and apply it to the white balance. Very important to note that in order to use this correctly, we have to come into the custom white balance setting on tab number 3, on page 3 of our red tab. So the way this works is we're going to take a picture of something that's pure white. These blinds are pure white. We're going to come into the menu, custom white balance, and we are going to select the image that we took a picture of that should be color neutral. I've done it with brides' dresses, I've done it with tablecloths, I've done it with walls and the ceilings. Sometimes you just need something white, right? So we come in here, we're gonna hit set, use this white balance data for the custom white balance, okay. And then we set the camera to this icon, which we're telling it this is our custom white balance setting, and this should be pure white. And as I see it on the monitor, it looks perfect. This is ideal for mixed lighting conditions. Maybe you have a little bit of tungsten, maybe a little bit of fluorescent, maybe a little bit, sunlight coming in, bouncing. So it just really depends on what you're doing. But when you're custom white balancing, it's typically with mixed lighting conditions. Getting your white balance dialed in correctly is going to be more important for videographers because they're shooting with a form of JPEG. There's not a lot of information in the file, but that is how you set your custom white balance. And the last setting is Kelvin. Kelvin is awesome. I use it all the time. If we want to set the color temperature, we would press this outside button, and now we can scroll up or down. There is a philosophy of use to this, and then there's a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is every light source has its own signature temperature. In the case of sunlight, it's about 5200 to 5600 Kelvin. Now, as I turn this down, you're going to notice that the screen is going to get blue. And this is counterintuitive because very low Kelvin temperature light sources are more yellow. And what's happening is the camera is adding blue to balance it out. If we were to go in the opposite direction and go higher, the screen would turn more and more yellow. The truth of the matter is high Kelvin temperature light sources are more blue. And what's happening is the camera is counteracting it. So it can get a little confusing, but suffice it to say, every light source has its own Kelvin. In the case of daylight, 5600. In the case of tungsten light, it can be 32 to 3400 Kelvin. Sometimes we get this mixed lighting where it's, between 4000 and 5000. It really depends on the light source. I know it's probably a little bit too much information. Suffice it to say, Kelvin allows us to dial it in specifically. And that's a quick overview on white balance. I wanted to talk and show you a demonstration of the metering modes, which is interesting because we have a dedicated button for metering modes just behind the primary selector. If you push it, you get our 4 different metering modes. The easiest way for me to explain this is to demonstrate the spot metering mode first. I have a single square selected, but you'll notice that in spot metering mode, we have this circle. And I am in aperture priority mode. I want to make sure this is on so you guys can see this. And as always, the camera is measuring the light coming into the lens, and we can see we get a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second, f4, right? So watch what happens when I move this circle over the light. Do you see how the shutter speed changed to be even faster? It wants a shutter speed faster than 1/8000th of a second. In the moment we move that circle outside the light, it goes back to a slower shutter speed. So what's happening here is that we are telling the camera to sample light within this circle. And that's what the spot metering mode does. It samples from about 2% of the viewfinder, and we're telling the camera to change the exposure settings based on a specific shape in the center of our viewfinder. The other metering modes work similarly. If we were to go with a partial metering, we get a larger circle. So when I come back over, it's the same thing. It's just a bigger area. And when we go to something like center weighted average, tap the shutter button, we can see that the location where it happens is in a bigger area. And then finally, we have evaluated metering, which is a general purpose metering mode. If you're just getting started, this makes a lot of sense. Just keep in mind that if you're shooting heavily backlit subjects, so if you were shooting a portrait and there was a lot of light coming in, you may want to change your metering mode to either partial or spot metering. Again, in the beginning, it can be very complex. Something else I want to point out is that if you're using a single focusing square, often that can be tied into the spot metering mode. Do you see how when I jumped onto the light? And that's a very handy thing if you're using a lot of single focusing squares. So even if I'm in the evaluative metering mode and you have a single focusing square, this is what's happening. Is that single square is acting as the spot metering mode. But suffice it to say, in the beginning, if you're just getting started, evaluated metering is the way to go. Let's talk about the Canon 90D's focusing systems. And to prevent any confusion, I have to emphasize there is the optical focusing system, which uses a focusing array located underneath the mirror, which is ideal for sport shooting, fast-moving subjects. And this is completely different than the live view focusing system using the back monitor. I will be creating a separate individual video for the optical focusing system. Check the link in the description, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be updated when it's posted. If it's ready, just check the table of contents and we'll put the link for the video in there. Keeping them separately is going to make this a lot easier. Very powerful focusing systems, lots of technical things. There is some overlap, but let's treat them separately. We're going to talk about using live view. So we're going to be using the focusing systems that are built in to the sensor. We're not using that focusing array underneath the mirror. So when we're looking at our camera's focusing systems, the easiest way to break this down is into the how, the when, and the where the camera focuses. How, when, and where. And if you think about it in that way, it's going to be easy. So the first question is, how does the camera focus? By default, When you get your camera out of the box, if you push your shutter button halfway down, it engages the camera's focusing systems. And when we push the shutter button down all the way, it takes the picture. Pretty straightforward. You will also notice we have this AF on button, it's a thumb button, that will also engage the camera's focusing systems. Second question is, when is the camera focusing? This deals with the camera's focusing modes. And to access our camera's focusing modes, we're going to push the far left button on top of the camera. It says AF. And when we push that, we get two options, one shot and servo. Let's talk about one shot first. So one shot basically means that when we push the shutter button halfway down and we hold it halfway down, you notice we get a beep. You see those green boxes. As long as we hold the shutter button halfway down, we can move and rotate the camera and the focus will not change. It stays locked. Pushing it down all the way will take the picture. Now, when you're looking through the viewfinder, this can be a very valuable technique. It's referred to as recomposing. Maybe you'll get a focus lock on a subject and you want to make it more aesthetically pleasing in the frame. Every photographer should know how to do this. Get a focus lock and recompose by holding that shutter button halfway down. Now, typically when we look through the viewfinder, we will also see a little green dot that indicates focus lock. Servo is a little bit different in that the camera will focus over and over and over again. This is ideal for sports shooting because we have moving subjects. They may be running towards us or away. And even in the time that we push the shutter button halfway down, the subject can change its position, which would change its focus requirement. So this is why we get blue squares. Blue indicates a continuous servo focus. So this focus is happening over and over and over again, even if we push the shutter button halfway down. Now, when I tapped on the screen, I can focus by touching. This jumps back to the one shot. Pushing halfway down with the shutter button engages the servo or the continuous focus. This is better for obviously moving subjects. Your kids are running around. If you are dealing with adults and you want, they're posing and they can hold the pose, then one shot would probably be better. So you can see how the focusing mode would change whether we're dealing with a still subject, something that does not move, or something that is moving and needs to be refocused continually. That is the win. One shot deals with once, servo deals with many times over. I'm going to turn it back to one shot. So we've talked about the how, we've talked about the when, now we are going to talk about the where. And this deals with our camera's focusing clusters, these little boxes that we see. And I have these targets up here to help us so I can show you the different clusters and move them around. We can access our focusing clusters by pressing the autofocus square selector button, I also call it the cluster button, just behind the shutter button. And as we push this, you can see, I'm pushing it repeatedly, it is toggling through 4 different options from left to right. In my opinion, at least looking through the viewfinder, the most useful is a single point, so we'll talk about it using live view. A single focusing point is a single square. And in live view, we can touch in different places along the viewfinder, from top to bottom, almost from side to side. Just a little bit, but definitely from top to bottom. This is incredibly useful because even in the optical viewfinder, we are limited to a certain amount of area. And there are times that you may want to focus outside of that area. You can flip it over and do so here. Obviously, it depends on what we're doing. But most of the time, I'm usually shooting with a single square for portraits, landscapes. Just about everything is almost always single square. Toggling the cluster button again, we are given the option of, let's come over to spot. Essentially the same thing. It's just a smaller, more precise square. You'll notice if we want to reset to the center, we can push in the joystick to the middle. We can also do some fine tuning by using the joystick and moving it around. Let's take a look at zone. Zone gives the camera permission to look within a certain region. You'll notice it's looking for the target and the tripod. It's typically looking for an area of contrast. That's where we see it lining up. So zone is obviously a bigger square. This would be useful for, you know, things that are quickly moving, maybe birds in flight that aren't too far away, trying to get them in there. And again, it's looking for contrast. So our last focusing cluster is we have, you can barely see, it's a face and a tracking. When we get to that icon, if we press the info button, you can see that I can toggle eye detection versus face detection. So there's actually several different modes in here, and we'll talk about each of them real quick. If we do not touch the screen anywhere and we push the shutter button halfway down, you'll notice the camera is focusing on the tripod and on this other marker over here. Essentially what's happening is the camera is looking for an area of contrast, saying where is the greatest contrast. If it's similar, it'll often pick the one closest to the camera. That's what's going on. It's looking in the full frame, contrast closest to the camera. So you'll notice that as I'm touching on the screen, it's just giving me these boxes. But if I touch on an area and then I press AF on, with either the shutter button or the AF on button, we get this tracking mode. And with one shot, it is predicting the motion of the target. It's not focusing on it, it's just following it. So this ability to track, once we engage the tracking, it's just following the subject. We know this because if I take the pen, put it here, and I engage the tracking, and I move the pen away, it stays out of focus. So it's not changing the focus, it just tracks. There is a feature that we can turn on. I don't recommend having it on most of the time because it's going to create some problems where it's always focusing when you don't want it to. It's called continuous autofocus. So if I bring the pen back out and we put the tracking on it, you can see it's starting to track it now. I tricked it. It's not perfect, but now the focus is following it. That's just a trick to have in your toolbox if you want it. It's more useful in video, and there's a different way to do that, which I'll demonstrate. So that is the tracking in this mode. Now you also see that we have this face. So I'm going to hang up a face target and I will walk you through those examples. Something you'll notice about this face cluster with tracking is that when you start pointing the camera at a human face with that turned on, what's going to happen is we will get these four corners around that human face. It's tracking the human face. It isn't necessarily focusing on the human face, but when you push the shutter button halfway down, it is going to get focus lock on that face. Now, obviously, we have to see a certain amount of space. The further away we zoom out, that face will get smaller and smaller, and at some point, it will stop working. Now, having said all that, there is a very important tool here. It says Info Eye, and when we push the Info button, you can see that we're now getting eye lock. It's tracking the eye. The reason why that is important is that when we are shooting portraits with a very wide aperture, 1.8, 1.4, sometimes 1.2, we have a very shallow depth of field, and it is difficult to get it in focus. We may have an eye over, on the corner. The camera will get that focus lock on the eyeball. It's a game changer. Ever since I saw it the first time, I was like, wow, that is amazing. So if you're shooting portraits with a very wide aperture, this is probably a better tool than using the optical viewfinder, and we will talk about those examples on the crash course. So that is eye detection, and you can always jump back to face detection by pushing the info button. So we've talked about the how, we've talked about the when, we've talked about the where, which is the focusing clusters, and there's actually a few more tools I want to show you just in live view for stills, and we'll take a look at the video. One tool you should definitely be aware of, you see it all the time in Hollywood movies, is the ability to pull focus. Typically this is done with a number of gears and wheels, and you need a person whose job is dedicated to change the focusing. It's the first assistant camera operator, and his job is to really move the lens ring. That's how it's done in Hollywood. But because we have a touch screen and a focusing system that will react to it, if you are on a single focusing square, you can just simply touch on the monitor. So this is pulling focus. Obviously, we would turn the beep off so it wouldn't be annoying. If you have a quiet lens, this is a very powerful tool because we can change the focus by just touching on the screen. Again, we'll be covering this on the 90D crash course, some of the other techniques involved. So let's talk about manual zoom focusing. Now, typically, we just touch on the monitor, right, to zoom. You'll notice I'm changing where the box is, and I'm going to flip the lens switch from autofocus to manual. Over here, we have a zoom icon next to this button, and when we push it, we are zooming in where the square last was, and we can use our manual focusing ring to get tack sharp focus depending on where we were looking. And that's referred to as manual zoom focusing. I do it a lot for landscape photography. When I want to focus 1/3 into the frame, we can push the zoom button again and get 10x magnification. Pretty awesome tool. There is yet another amazing feature. To access it, we're going to come into the menu, and we are going to look for manual peaking settings, manual focus peaking settings. So manual focus peaking essentially means that we will only see this in manual focusing. You don't see it in autofocus. Levels high, the colors, we have red, yellow, and blue. I'm going to point out what this is. You can see it on the edge of the frame here. What this does is that as we manually focus, we're going to get a red overlay where there is a high degree of contrast. You can barely see it in my eyes and in the blinds, and that is going to tell us where the greatest contrast in the image is. It should be around the point of greatest sharpness, and this is referred to as peaking focus. There is one negative about this, is that as we zoom in, we lose the peaking. So if you don't see it when you zoom in, at the time of this recording, it is normal. You can only see it when you're zoomed out. This is a better tool for videography, and we'll be talking about some of those focusing features in just a minute. So I'm going to flip my lens switch back over to autofocus because I want to talk about back button focusing. Back button focusing means that we're removing the focusing from our halfway shutter button depression, and we're using focus only with our AF on button. The way we set this up is we need to come out of live view. We're going to come into our Q screen, highlight the camera icon. We mentioned it earlier, and we're going to select the shutter button. Typically, the shutter button will meter and focus. And what we're going to do is remove the focusing from it so the camera only meters when we push that shutter button halfway down. Now, once we do this, you got to remember you did this, otherwise you may think your camera is broken, is that when we push the shutter button halfway down, no focusing happens. Nothing's happening. It's only when we push the AF on button that the focusing systems are engaged. When we do the sports shooting lesson on the crash course, I'll give you a demonstration of this, but typically the idea is that you can be shooting a moving subject. We'll pretend the pole is the moving subject. Moving, 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 and I'm just engaging the focus. And if my subject stops, I can lift up my thumb and the focusing will not change, and I can recompose and I can shoot in a more interesting composition. If I had it left on my shutter button, the camera would be focusing on the background, not on my subject. So this is why it's a little bit more desirable to get into the habit of focusing with your thumb, is that you can disengage, recompose, fire away, and the focal plane should not have changed too much. And that is why sports focusers love back button focusing. Now I'm going to change it back because otherwise I would forget and it would drive me crazy. So in regards to live view still shooting, the how is the halfway shutter button depression or the AF on button. The when is either one shot or servo, depending on if your subject's moving, and the where deals with the different clusters. It's a lot to remember. Again, just think of how, when, and where. The question you'll probably have is, how does that change when we are talking about video shooting? So we're going to flip this over to video shooting, and there is something that's a little bit different in here, which is the servo autofocus. Completely different ball game, because this is going to update the focusing in the same way a servo focusing would with a halfway shutter button depression. So let's put it on this guy right here. And I'm going to come in and select tracking. I'm going to push the shutter button to engage that. And what's going to happen is the camera is going to track that and focus it. So even if we zoom in, you can see the focus is being updated. Zoom out. And for video shooters, this is a dream come true because the camera is doing so much of the work for us. It's focusing. So you can have a subject walking towards the camera, talking, and the camera is going to do the job of the first AC. It's going to update it automatically. If you do not want that, just touch Servo AF and that will turn off. If you want it on again, there it is. Again, we can use this with different clusters. If we wanted to go with a single square, no problem. Again, rack zooming. We can track anything within an area. You can hear the lens motor changing. So anything that square is on, camera's going to focus. It's updating, and that's what Servo AF does for you. Again, remember that only works in video mode. The workaround for stills mode is to come into the menu and turn on continuous AF. Servo AF is going to work with the other clusters as well. Even eye detection. I found that when I'm tracking moving subjects, usually face detection is enough, unless you're shooting with a really wide aperture lens, but it's an awesome feature. Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which is what's making this happen, is elite. It's one of the best. I think Sony and Fuji are getting pretty close, but Canon has always been fantastic at tracking moving subjects for video, and it really takes the amount of work needed to make a great looking video off the shoulders of the videographer. In the past, you'd need 2 or 3 guys to do it. Totally feasible to do it with one person now. So that is your focusing systems. For live view, we've covered a lot of information. Again, keep an eye out for the optical focusing video that will be coming out shortly. Let's take a look at the deep menu system. To access our deep menu, we're going to press the menu button, and you're going to notice that we have these different colored tabs on the top. The colors actually do mean different things. Red is for shooting, blue is for playback, purple is for our Wi-Fi settings, the yellow wrench is our camera settings, we have our customizations, and then we have our My Menu tab, which is customizable. Most of the good stuff, most of the good and important stuff in regards to shooting are going to be found in the red tab. Very important that you'll notice just below the red tab, we have these numbers. Those are different pages within each tab. So the red tab, and I can navigate also by pushing on the directional pad here. You can also use the primary selector. You can also use the joystick. But I think if you can learn to use the edge of your finger, like a corner of a finger, and if you can get precise, this is the fastest way to navigate. Canon's menu systems are by far the best in terms of ease of use, usability. They're just the best out there. You can navigate quickly, you can jump, it's easy to keep track of where things are. In this portion of the lesson, I'm going to walk you through the most important things. I'm going to make recommendations in regards to settings. I'm going to tell you the critical things. I'm not going to cover everything because there are many lessons that require hands-on shooting. For example, flash control. We have a flash lesson on the crash course where I'll show you how to use your flash. And there's many others, but I will point these out as we go along. Image quality is very important. This is where we designate the type of file we're recording, whether it's RAW or JPEG. RAW is on the top here. We also have this CRAW, which is a compressed or a compact RAW. And we also have our JPEGs, which are different actual sizes. Something to keep in mind is that RAW files retain a lot of information, and therefore the file size is huge. And therefore, if you're shooting with RAW, you're going to fill up your memory card faster. For example, if you're shooting sports and you're shooting, hundreds or thousands of images, it's going to fill up pretty quick. So there are times you may just want to shoot JPEG. It really depends on what you're doing. My rule of thumb is that if it's a paid shoot, it's RAW. And this is going to allow me to process things such as white balance, color, contrast. You have a lot more latitude with raw files. If I'm shooting an event and I'm going to have, potentially thousands of images, it's usually JPEG. So let me walk you through what some of these numbers and icons mean. The 32M refers to the total number of megapixels that we're capturing with our sensor. Obviously, we have a 32 megapixel sensor, and this is telling us that we're using all of those pixels to create the image. And these next two numbers tell us the dimensions of the image. 6,960 pixels wide, 4,640 pixels tall. And again, when we see the brackets, that tells us how many shots we can take on this particular setting. This icon here is the primary control wheel. And what it's saying is you can change your raw settings by rotating the primary control wheel. We can change our JPEG settings by pushing to the left and right on the arrows. Something you'll notice is that when you select raw, watch what happens to the number of shots remaining. Just under 900. I go with smooth L. Watch what happens between the difference of smooth L and jagged L. Twice as many images. Now, the interesting thing about this is even though they're JPEG and they're smaller, even though they're the same resolution, this one is half the file size. And what's happening is something called compression. It's where the processor essentially looks at two adjacent pixels and says, you know what, you guys are close enough to be the same thing, and it assigns them the same color value. But these letters here, L refers to large, and when we hit M, watch what happens to the dimensions of the image. 15 megapixels. And the actual pixels change. So this is a smaller image, smaller file size as we continue to go down. Jagged M, take 10,000 images. And then we get down to small. You can see the dimensions are even smaller with 8.1 megapixels for S1. And S2 is 3.8 megapixels. So just under 4 megapixels, that would be something that maybe you'd want to use for the internet. But again, it really depends on what you're doing. And the advice I usually give to my students is start off with JPEG, jagged or smooth L, whichever one you want. I think jagged L is fine for most typical shooting situations. When you get into landscape work and you're doing heavy processing, we'll talk about landscape photography in the crash course. RAW is the way to go. Mixed lighting conditions, important paid work, all things to keep in mind. Aspect ratio. For the most part, an aspect ratio of 3:2 is going to be plenty. It's going to use the whole dimensions of the sensor. But if we wanted to go to a 4:3 aspect ratio or 16:9, look what happens when we come into live view is it gives us the cinema aspect ratio. This is for a still shooting mode. If we wanted to shoot 1:1 Instagram, and it would take a square image. Again, my advice, go 3:2. You can crop it in post if you need. Image review is that when you shoot an image, how many seconds do you want it to play back for? I think 2's plenty. Release shutter without card. I have mine on enable. Some people think there's an internal memory and somehow it's recording. If you don't have a memory card, that's not the case. If you don't have a memory card, it's not saving your images. And if you want, as a safety, you can turn this on to disable. Lens aberration correction, a lot of information. But basically what this is doing is when we put Canon lenses on to our 90D, most of those Canon lenses are registered with the camera, and the camera has the ability to clean up lens errors, like peripheral illumination correction, which is another fancy word for vignetting. That's darkening in the corners on very wide angle lenses. Distortion correction is when things start bowing in or out. Digital lens optimizer will correct things such as diffraction or low pass filter problems. And there's no data for on this lens. Maybe that's coming. I have it turned on. So something to keep in mind. This is what it does. I usually have it turned on most of the time. There's no data for this, so I'm going to turn that off. And the moment we turn it off, chromatic aberration correction, diffraction correction. This is all good stuff. So just keep that in mind. Flash control. So on the crash course, we're going to be talking about using your flash. We talk about using the onboard flash. We talk about using a speed light. The recommended flash system that I tell my students is the Godox TT685C. It's like $100 to $110 on Amazon. It's a great flash. You can do a lot with it. If you get serious and you want to go very high end, you can go with the Canon 600EX RT2s. Those are pretty expensive, but value, those Godoxes are hard to beat. There's a lot of information about flash. Typically that lesson is anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour, and I'll teach you the basics of shooting with flash. On this second page, we have something called exposure compensation, AEB. The exposure compensation you already know, and we can adjust it by you know what I demonstrated earlier. This is a little different in that it introduces bracketing, which when we rotate our primary selector wheel, we get these little tick marks that start breaking off. What bracketing does is it tells the camera to take 3 shots, and in this case, it is -2 stops, even, and +2 stops. So I'm going to hit OK. You can see that we have bracketing here, designated. So I push the shutter button down 3 times, and we get the 3 different images, and the camera is changing the shutter speed between those shots. So if you're in a very high dynamic range situation with lots of shadows and lots of highlights, that would be a time to shoot with auto exposure bracketing. We can, if I'm on manual mode, so let's move this over to aperture priority mode. And when I do that, I can now shift that bracket in different directions. Doesn't like it on manual mode. And when you're done, you're going to rotate your primary selector wheel back, and you're into your regular shooting mode again. ISO speed settings. The first one is your ISO setting. It's the same as changing it on the top of your camera. We have a range we can choose from. If we wanted to go, I don't know, leave it at 200 or higher, our camera will shoot at a maximum of 51,200 ISO. It's obviously super grainy, but if we wanted to turn that on, we could. We'd hit OK. When we are using auto ISO, this question is asking what is the range you want it to fall between. So if you found this, you know, it's a little too noisy at 12,800, you'd leave it at 6,400. And this tells the camera to stay within these limits. Minimum shutter speed is that when we are using modes such as program or aperture priority mode, we can come in here and specifically tell it the slowest shutter speed that we want it to use. For beginners, I don't really recommend this. Auto's fine for now. But if you wanted to really lock it out of using long shutter speeds, you can come in here and you know, select 1/60th or 1/125th of a second. Leave it there for now. Back out. Auto light optimizer, again, is a contrast adjustment. It's disabled in manual and bulb modes. We'll talk about bulb in just a second. I think standard is fine for the beginning. I know some friends who turn it off completely. Again, this deals mostly with JPEGs, and standard is good if you're just getting started. Highlight tone priority is something I leave turned off. What this does is it gives the camera permission to basically shift in favor of the highlights. So if it thinks it's going to overexpose something very, very bright, the camera will make a very slight shift to retain those highlights. And I don't like it because I like to understand what's going on with the basic camera settings. And I think this is a good place to start if you're a pure beginner as well. The metering timer deals with how long our shutter speed and aperture show. Watch, it'll turn off after 8 seconds. Leave this on long enough, there it goes. That's all it is. It's a timer that will allow us to determine how long our exposure settings are showing. So this last guy right here, exposure simulation, this gives us our live view preview. If you are not in live view, a couple of these guys are going to disappear. Watch this. Tapping my shutter button, I'm going to get out of live view. I'm going to press the menu button again, and now we only have 4 of those menu items. Press live view, press the menu button, and here we get all 6. So keep that in mind. If you don't see certain menu items, it may be because you're in a certain mode the camera doesn't like. Exposure simulation, by default, when you get the camera, it should be enabled. If this is not turned on and you go through the modes lesson, this is going to be a nightmare. None of that will make sense. You have to make sure that this is on enable before we talk about the modes and the exposure. What this means is the camera is going to give us a prediction of how bright the image is going to be before we take the shot. So when it's on and I'm changing let's say my exposure compensation. You can see it's getting brighter, right? Well, if we turn that off, disable it, which is something you should do when you're using flash in a studio setting with multiple strobes, nothing changes. Okay, so that is really what it does, and we can also assign it to the depth of field preview button. So it will only work when we push that little button. It's on this side of the camera where the grip is, right next to the lens mount. Push that and it'll should engage live view. Never use it. This is almost always on enable. White balance is the same as selecting it from our other menus. This is just where we choose it. I'm gonna hit OK. This is where we designate what we want to use as our custom white balance source. We talked about that in the white balance lesson. White balance shift in bracket allows us to shift the tint and the hue of our white balance towards blue, green, amber, or magenta. I almost never do this for stills. In some video occasions, I'll shift it over to blue. It just depends. But I don't do this with Canon cameras because the color science on Canon cameras are, in my opinion, they just don't need to be corrected as much. So short answer on this is if you're a beginner, do not worry about it. As you become more advanced, if you're not getting the most out of your white balance, you could start tweaking and experimenting with that. Color space. The vast majority of us, unless we're shooting for a magazine would require Adobe RGB. Almost everyone else is using sRGB. Picture styles. Again, if you're a pure beginner, just stick with auto or standard. Picture styles have to do with the recipe that the camera's computer is using to create JPEGs. For example, and you might want to start playing with this once you start getting a grasp of, exposure and focusing, and you want to start taking a deeper look. Take a look at portrait when you are shooting flesh tones. Watch how it changes the color of flesh in JPEGs. Or in landscape, you're going to see more, blues and greens are going to be a little bit more vivid. We've got fine detail, neutral, and there's many other settings we can come in and customize this. When you are ready to customize, you would hit the info detail set. You can adjust things such as sharpness, contrast, saturation, color tone. But again, the short answer on this is if you're a beginning or intermediate photographer, don't worry about it for now. Some videographers will definitely come in here and they'll go more neutral and they'll turn the contrast and the sharpness down. But again, don't worry about it for now if you're just getting started. Page 4, the red tab, long exposure noise reduction. Anything over 1 second is considered a long exposure, and you can have that on auto, so it'll kick in if you shoot, for more than 1 second at a time. Just know that once this is on, it's going to take longer for the camera to write the file to the memory card because it's cleaning it up. So I turn it off just for my own sanity. High ISO noise reduction, medium's good for most general purposes. If you're just getting started, I think that's a good place. Dust delete data. This is something that I have never used on any Canon camera. The idea of this is it allows us to use software to clean up dust specks that will get on our sensor. It is going to happen, and I have a very detailed video showing you how to clean your sensor on your 90D, the tools that I use, why I use them. I have used just about everything out there, and there's some that will actually mess your sensor up, so it's worth watching. I don't ever use the dust delete data. Shutter mode. Most of the time, if I'm shooting stills, I like to be shooting on mechanical. And the reason is when we shoot in electronic, we can start to see artifacts from LEDs. So if I have electronic determined and I come in to my standard shooting mode, you don't see it right now. I'm going to bump this up. You're going to start seeing stuff like this. So I shot an electronic shot. It was silent, but look at the banding that we get. So alternating current is shooting at 120 hertz, which means it's flickering on and off at 120 times per second. So what this means is that we're capturing with our electronic shutter some of this. And the way you get around this in electronic shutter mode is to shoot at 1/60th of a second. So if you see that with LED lights, that's what's going on. It's silent, which is cool. It's still there a little bit. It looks like it wants us to use maybe 1/50th of a second. But that's one of the reasons why I don't really like electronic mode. It's still there. Wow, that's crazy. Typically that resolves it. So what I typically like to do is just shoot in mechanical mode. If you're shooting outdoors, electronic mode is going to allow us to shoot at 1/16,000th of a second. It's a much faster shutter speed. Just know that if you're panning with your subject, you might get the jello effect. It's like this stretchy artifact. And so for that reason, I don't really shoot with electronic. Electronic first curtain means that the first shutter curtain is just an electronic capture followed by a mechanical curtain. Some people like that hybrid, but for sport shooting, I think mechanical is the way to go. Live view shoot allows us to enable live view shooting. If we turn it off, we will not go into live view. It's basically a safety feature. In these next two, multiple exposure mode allows us to stack multiple images on top of each other. It's something that you can do in post with regular images using Photoshop and layers. This is something that in order to fully appreciate what it does, I have a separate lesson for it on the crash course where I'll actually go out and show you the best tips and tricks. I've seen some pretty spectacular things done with this. It's kind of a, I hate to say gimmick, but it is. Some pretty cool things that you can do. And then the HDR mode is going to allow the camera to take multiple images, stack them together. We can turn it on, to 2 or 3. Again, this is one of these features that I will give you a demonstration on how it works in the crash course. There's a time and place for it. Not great with moving subjects, but in certain types of landscape images, it can really work. We'll talk about all this and how to use it in a real world setting. Same thing with interval timer. We have a built-in intervalometer. The moment we turn it on, we have the ability to come in. We can designate the time between shots and then the number of shots all the way up, 99 or unlimited. In the crash course, I will be demonstrating how to do time-lapse videos where we go down to the beach and we do a sunset and take multiple images and stack them together. There's a couple really cool tricks I can show you. And that's what it is. It's an intervalometer. Very cool. There is a mode on the mode dial up here that we have not talked about. It says B. That stands for your bulb mode. Bulb is like a really long exposure mode. It essentially means that when we push the shutter button down, the exposure starts, and when we release it, the exposure ends. That's how bulb mode should work. It's overexposed. So when we come into something like this and we see bulb timer, we can come in here and enable this, come into our info detail set, and we can dial in the specific amount of time we want this exposure to take place over for hours, minutes, or seconds. There's a number of cool things that we can do, kind of more of an advanced thing when we're going through for these really long exposures and star trails and things of that nature, but this allows us to have control over how long the exposure time is with our bulb. For now, I'm going to turn it off, come back over to Aperture Priority. Focus bracketing means that we can control where the focus is and the camera will adjust it from shot to shot. We can designate the number of shots. I've never needed anything to do 100 shots. It's usually like, 6 to 10 at most. So I'm just going to come over here, something like that. So you choose the number of shots. You can choose the steps or the intervals between them, and then you would fire away. I will include a lesson on focus bracketing and the applications and how to use this again on the crash course. We've got a lot of these little side lessons in terms of philosophy of use and how to apply them. But this allows the camera to shift the focus from shot to shot, stack them together to get a very deep depth of field. Coming into page 6, we have our autofocus clusters. There they are in live view, right? Again, we have our eye detection. This is something that we could toggle with the info button when we're using face detection. Continuous autofocus is something I recommend leaving turned off unless you have a specific reason for forcing the camera to focus. Oh, look, we have our interval. No, this is our focus bracketing. That happens sometimes. I just forget. It'll happen. You just do a setting and you forget it. But if you see any weird icons like that, Probably left something on. But yeah, the continuous autofocus, I don't like it because the camera is constantly engaging focusing, and I feel like it wears the battery down. Just my thought on it. Lens electronic manual focus. So there are certain lenses that focus is controlled electronically. And what this does is that when you are in one-shot autofocus, you want the ability to rotate your manual focusing ring to dial in manual focus. If you do want to do that and you have a lens for it, you would select enable. Autofocus assist beam firing. This has to do with speed lights. I recommend leaving it on. If you turn it off and you're using a speed light and you're in a very dark setting, you are probably going to run into some focusing problems. And there are some other options in here, but nothing good has ever come from people playing around in here and forgetting that they did so. So we're gonna leave that on. And then we have our peaking focusing, which we've already talked about in the focusing lesson. And that is our red tab, which is our shooting tab. Very important to note that when we flip this over to our video icon, when we come back into the menu, you are going to notice that certain things have changed. Not many, just a couple. For example, movie servo AF tracking sensitivity is not turned on. I'll show you how to dial this in later. Again, we have our peaking, but it's interesting to me that Canon has done this. We have things like our resolutions. We can change them from our menu if we want to. We can go with a high frame rate. Again, remember this is HD at 120 frames per second. So if you play that back at 30 frames per second, it's 4 times the slow motion, and I'll be demonstrating this on the crash course. One of the drawbacks is we don't have any audio. That's okay. There's a lot of cool things you can do with slow motion and music. I'm gonna hit OK. We have the 4K movie cropping, and this in here is warning us of potential overheating. Something else I need to point out before I forget is that the mode dial is sensitive in video recording. So you'll notice that when we're in this 120 frame rate, we lose sound, we lose digital movie. There's certain features that we lose, and this happens all the time. Okay, I'm gonna come back and turn that off. We're gonna come back to 4K at 30, press our menu, and we get those features back. So this is going to happen, is that you'll notice these things are grayed out, and you're like, what is going on? It's because another setting's turned on. Sound recording. Super important that we turn this to manual. I don't like the microphone on the camera. It's not as good. But when you turn it to manual, you have control over the gain, which is the recording level. And I almost always turn this down. I'm looking at the levels right here. We want to stay away from this red, because when it gets to the red, it starts to clip out and we lose that information, and it's going to sound terrible. Even if you have a good microphone, keep an eye on this to make sure you're not clipping out. And as I said earlier, you're going to want an onboard microphone if you're doing any type of serious sound recording. We're going to hit OK. The wind filter and attenuator, usually just turn them off because they don't really work anyway. Another important piece of advice is to get a headset you can plug into your camera, and you can listen to the audio as it's coming in, so you can hear if there's any problems or static interference, and you can adjust your levels to a good level. But if we leave this on auto, what's going to happen is the camera's gain is going to be shifting, and the audio is going to be all over the place, and it's going to sound terrible. So make sure you turn this to manual when you are doing video recording. Movie digital image stabilization, I recommend turning it off. The camera is going to basically zoom in and crop your video out to stabilize it. This is something you can do in post. If you do it in camera, you're going to lose resolution. We have our aberration correction for vignetting, things of that nature. Pretty cool. We can do time-lapse movie, which is basically giving the camera permission to assemble stills into a movie, and this is a really cool thing because we can come in here and we can choose whether it's 4K or HD. What are the interval times? How many images? And so the difference between time-lapse movie and an intervalometer is this is actually making the movie for us in camera. We're going to turn this off. You'll notice that we have these different scenes, and the settings are a little bit different on each. 5 seconds for 240 frames. Scene 3 is intervals of 15 seconds for 240. And then we can come in and do custom, where we can just decide what we want. Again, I'll be giving those examples on the crash course. We're going to turn it off for now. Come back out. If we want to use a compatible remote control, this is where we enable it. Pretty straightforward. Video snapshot is a feature that records these, I think it's like 4 to 8 seconds of a video clip and assembles it together. Not a huge fan of it. I've never used it. And then we come back into many of these other settings that we've already seen. Most of them should be similar. We have HDMI info display. So if we're feeding this out to an HDMI recorder like the Atomos Ninja 5, we can see the information. If we want it clean with no exposure settings or anything like that, we could go to 4K, and then we can go to full HD. So one question is why would you want the information displayed? Well, sometimes you want to use those as a monitor, as an external monitor. You want to see the camera settings. That's why you would want to have it on. Let's see what else we got. Something else I need to point out is that when you are shooting with LED lights that are on an alternating current, meaning they're plugged into the wall, you might see something like this. Watch what happens when I use a faster shutter speed. Is we get this ugly banding. And you will also see this when using an electronic shutter for stills. This has to do with alternating current and a mismatch between the frame rate and the hertz of the electricity. I did a video on it. Why does blinking happen on videos? So this explains why this happens, and the solution to this is using a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. It's going to eliminate it. Everything's going to be fine. So if you see that, that's the problem. So keep all that in mind. There are different red menus between the video and the stills. And there's even differences between live view and no live view. Okay, so there's the live view. Page 2, right? Turn it off. Page 2. I don't know why they did it like that. It's kind of weird, but if you don't see things, that's why. The anti-flicker shooting feature has to do with this alternating current, in that sometimes even the exposure and the temperature of the lights you're shooting in can change. When you turn this on, you may experience this shutter lag where you push a shutter button down and the picture doesn't happen right away. It's because the camera is timing it between the flickers. So I saw it at a track meet where the sodium lights were changing colors between shots, turned it on, no problem. Mirror lockup is handy when you're doing very telephoto shots and you don't want to shake the camera. It basically allows us to flip the mirror up before the shot. See, reduces camera shock. Do not point it at the sun. Okay. So that's what that's all about. Let's make sure we got everything in here. So that's the red tab. Next tab is the blue, which is the playback tab. A lot of these in here are things I don't really use, like protecting images. You could come in and select individual images. You can select a range. You can select all the images in a folder. And when you protect them, the idea is it puts this little key icon on it. And when you delete all the images in the folder, it will not erase that one image. The problem with this is when you are dealing with formatting the memory card, which is something you're going to do often, this isn't going to protect it anyway. And I typically only format my cards. I don't really delete all the images. Sometimes people will micromanage. They'll have all their images on one card. They'll never download them. They're just going to try to keep them all, which is a bad idea anyway. So the short answer on this is it's something I don't really use. You could protect all the images in a folder. You can unprotect them. All the images on a card. Rotating the images, if we wanted to rotate it 90 degrees. Sometimes you're shooting at a funky angle, straight up or straight down, and the camera doesn't know which way is up. You can rotate it. You could erase individual images in groups. So you can select individuals like this. If we wanted, it should let us zoom out. We can come in, choose different images. delete them, choose arrange. Again, we can delete them in a folder on a card. Again, this is just not how I do it. When in terms of workflow, I'll go out and I'll do a shoot. The moment I come in to the door, I put the memory card in my computer, I start downloading the images, and I start charging my batteries again. As soon as the images are downloaded, I make a second backup. And then when that second backup is made, I make a third online backup. So at that point, I actually have 4 copies, 2 on my hard drives, and then 1 on a cloud, and then 1 in the memory card. And I leave the memory card intact until I am ready to go shoot, just in case I missed something. And it has happened where I go back and I find it on the card. And then when I'm preparing to go out for the shoot and I'm sure I've gotten everything downloaded, then I reformat the memory cards. I don't do this micromanaging with deleting images. I think it's risky and not a good idea. Print order allows us to connect our camera to a computer and print from the camera. Again, this is something I don't really use because I've downloaded all my images to my computer. But if you have nothing else and you have a USB cable and a way to connect it, you can come in and select an image and then you can basically print it. But like I said, this is just something that I don't really use ever. I don't use it. You can choose multiple copies of the same one if you want. Come back out. Same thing with a photo book setup. There's a way to create essentially a photo book by coming in and selecting different images. Again, something I just don't use. The creative filters, we have a designated mode on our mode dial for this. Might as well just talk about those real quick. So let me flip this over to those creative filters. Some of them, most of them are a waste of time. But if we are in that creative filter icon and we press on the icon in the top left-hand corner, we can scroll through these. Grainy black and white, soft focus, fisheye effect, water painting effect, kind of cool, toy camera. The miniature effect, yeah, sorta, can be pretty cool sometimes. It does it by blurring out certain parts of the image. And then we have the 4 different HDRs. We have HDR Art Standard, Art Vivid, Art Bold, and Art Embossed. And essentially these are different HDR flavors or recipes that the camera is going to take multiple images and combine them. We have a dedicated HDR mode in the camera, which is always better than these guys. It's been my experience. But you may want to come and play around with the HDRs. So the idea on the menu is that when you see these creative filters, you can apply them to an image that you've already taken by coming in, pressing the set button, and seeing those same icons again. And as you scroll through it, you just pick the one that you want. It's interesting. It doesn't let us do the HDRs because we need to take multiple images. Makes sense. We can press the set button, choose from different options if we wanted to, and then apply them. And so that's the idea of the creative filters. In the menu, it allows you to do it after the fact. So coming into page 2 of the blue tab, raw image processing is that when we take a picture in RAW, let's make sure we got our quality here, it's on. We can take a picture in RAW. We have some very minor ways that we can tweak this in terms of raw processing. We'll just select this image. We'll say, yeah, okay. And let's customize the raw processing. So this is going to give us a few options. You have a lot more firepower in Lightroom or Bridge, Camera Raw, depending on what you're using. But this will allow us to change the exposure, the white balance, the picture style, auto lighting optimizer, noise reduction. We can downsize if we want to, use a different color gamut, aberration correction. We can save it, which is basically an export it, or we can return. The short answer on this is I do it all on my computer. I almost never do it in the camera. So we're going to come back out. We can do the same thing for arrange. The Creative Assist is sort of like a dumbed down version of raw processing. And the easiest way you can see it, so when you designate it, we have this little icon up here for the Creative Assist. And this is going to allow us to apply some of these filters and effects after the fact to an image. If you want to see it while you're shooting, I'm going to go to the dummy mode, and you can see the same thing right here in the corner. So this is like a super intuitive way. If people are intimidated and they don't want to learn their cameras, it's, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to change? So for this reason, I never use it. I never recommend my students use it. Stick with the basics and you're going to get a lot more mileage out of your camera. So the quick control raw processing is essentially asking, which of these two do you want to be available for quick raw control, either creative assist or raw image processing. You can designate that in different places like we just demonstrated. Again, this is just something I don't even bother with. Red eye correction, if you're using a flash and we get red eye correction tells the camera to clean it up. You can come in here and set, obviously I don't have any images with red eye, but it allows you to clean it in camera. And for some people who don't have Photoshop, this can be really nice. We also have the ability to create an album using video snapshots and things of that nature. Again, not something I ever use. We can crop our images. Pretty straightforward, self-explanatory. Come in here, you hit set. By pressing the magnifying glass, we can change the size of it. We can move it around. We can come in here and press these guys. We can rotate. It's slowly rotating in the background. You can kind of see it. We can change the aspect ratio. We can save it, or we can just leave. So if you wanted to crop it in camera, you can do it. We can resize, which typically means saving down to smaller sizes. There they are. When we're talking about rating images, this means to assign an image with either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars. We can do it by pressing the set button and then pushing up on the directional pad. You can see that it's moving this number over. It recognizes some 5-star images I already have in the folder. But the idea is that when I press set, it sets it. I can come out to the menu. We can do it from a range. It wants us to select the first image, and then we would come down and select the last image, and then we can apply a rating to it. So we'll go from here to here. Set that as the last image. We'll come into Q, OK, and we can change the rating for all of those by rotating the primary selector wheel. If I know I have a killer shot, I will add a star rating to it if there's lots of images, but most of the time I'm not really messing with it. We can apply it to all the images in the folder and all the images in the card as well. Slideshow is something I really don't use anymore. I used to do it in weddings way back in the day where we would plug basically a video cable into a TV monitor. We could set it up and determine the display time for each image. We would loop it. We could have a transition effect. We could even select our background music, and when we're ready to go, we would come in and we would start the slideshow and it would play on the television. Pretty cool thing. You can do if you don't have anything else but a cable and a TV if you really want to see it. Kind of a nice feature. We can set our search conditions. So when we're scanning through our images, when we're jumping through them, do you want to scan by star rating, the date, the folder, protected images? Do you want to look at movies and things of that nature? So we can come in here and designate multiples. Anything with a star taken on this date, and then we would say okay, and that would designate those search conditions. I don't really mess with this because I handle all my shoots individually per day, and I don't have tons of images on a single card, but it's there if you want it. Image jump with a primary selection wheel. When we rotate our primary selection wheel, when we are playing an image, it will jump 10 images. That's the default. We can also have it jump by a specified number. We can rotate with our primary selector wheel every 30 images. We can jump by date. We can jump by folder, movies only, stills only, protected images, and even the star rating that we designate. We can also come back to 1, but I don't mess with the 1 because we get that from side to side when we're playing an image. Playback information display, but when you're playing an image back, we have the ability to look at different sets of information screens by toggling the info button. Histogram, nothing, different kinds of shooting data, things of that nature. So we can determine which information display we would see by checkboxing which of these guys we want to show up. There's a lot of information in here that it's kind of redundant. For example, screen 8, screen 7. This is just some, peripheral information. If we wanted to come in here and toggle this, we could press the info button and choose RGB instead of, the other one. So it gives us some options in terms of how to control these information screens. We just want brightness. Take away the RGB. In any event, we'll press OK. And when we press play and we toggle that information, we can see those different screens popping up. That's how it works. So there's the bar overlay. There's our white histogram. There's just the picture. Highlight alert. This deals with overexposure. I'll demonstrate it real quick. So let me overexpose this image. Make it nice and bright. Overexposed. I'm going to take a picture. And on playback, what's going to happen is that's going to flash in black anywhere where it was overexposed. So better for highlights in specific parts of the image. Let's see if we can make it work in a specific point. That's pretty close. I'll take a picture of this. So anything that's flashing is overexposed. That's what it does for you. Turn that off. We can enable our auto focus point display. So when we play the image back, we can see where the camera was focusing. It kind of annoys me, so I leave it turned off. We have a playback grid, either tic-tac-toe grid, 6x4, or even the 3x3 with diagonals. This is what it looks like when we're playing the image back. You can kind of see this overlay. Going to turn that off. View from last scene means that if you're scrolling through a bunch of images, let's say you took a few hours ago, when you come back into play, it's going to show you those images that you last looked at. Otherwise, you are going to be looking at the last consecutive image you took a picture of. I like it, I leave it on. Which brings us to the purple menu. The purple menu deals specifically with the Wi-Fi features, and I have a separate lesson for that. I'm trying to get through this, and hopefully I'll have it either in this lesson or as an additional video. Just check the table of contents if it's not here, and I will add a link into a separate lessons if it's not included. And in that video, I will show you how to connect your camera to your smartphone for remote shooting. Almost all this stuff has to do with this, except for maybe GPS settings. There's a GPS receiver we can add. We can also use our smartphone, which is probably a better choice than buying a module for this. It's heavy on the batteries, but keep an eye out for the Wi-Fi lesson in terms of how to connect. Yellow. This is our essentially camera settings menu. This is where we can change, things like our folder that we're shooting to. I have one folder I'm shooting to. I can create another one, and it's easy as that. Back in the day when I was shooting all day, every day, and I had multiple shoots, I would have different folders for each shoot, and I would just create a new folder every time I went to a different shoot, and it helped me to keep everything organized. Now, I don't do that. At the end of the day, I come in and organize my images. We'll just hit OK. File numbering. What this means is that when we change the memory card, do you want it to pick up where it left off? So if I was on image 234 and I changed the memory card, put a new memory card in, the next image would be numbered 235. Or do you want it to start at 0001 every time you put a new card in? This makes more sense to me, so I leave it on continuous. If I wanted to manually reset the images as I'm shooting, I would come into manual reset, and it would start it back at 0001. Auto rotate, I do recommend leaving this on. It's going to do it both for the camera as well as the computer. In some cases, when you're pointing the camera straight down or straight up or kind of at a weird angle, it can get confused, and that's when we use the rotate in the blue menu. Otherwise, it usually does a pretty good job of doing it. And your format memory card is something you are going to be using a lot. I talked a little bit about my workflow. I'll talk more about it on the crash course. It's very important that you always try to have 2 copies. As soon as you're done shooting, try to make a copy of your memory card, back that up somewhere, at least 2 copies before you reformat the card. Everything on the card is going to be erased. When you come in here and you hit OK, everything's gone. You're not going to be able to easily recover it. There are some things you can do, but most of the time when you format it, it's gone for good. And I recommend you do that regularly once you have backups. Establish a good, workflow and make those backups and reformat your memory cards for the next shoot. Auto power off, we talked about. I typically set this to maybe a minute when I'm actually using the camera. When I'm teaching, it'll be at 15 minutes or more. Your display brightness, obviously we can turn this up or down. This is handy when you're outdoors and you want it really, really bright. It's harder to see, right? Date and time we set up when we first got started. You can change it in here if you need to. Hopefully you're an English speaker if you're watching this, but if not, there are tons of languages in here. The video system, unless you know what PAL is, you are on NTSC. So in the United States, it's NTSC. In parts of Europe, the PAL system, you would come in here and change this. Touch control, I like it. You can make it more sensitive or you can turn it off if you want. Standard's fine for now. The beep, I usually do turn this off. Usually kind of annoys me. We can change our headphone volume. Very handy. We can also do that from the video mode when we're shooting. We have information about our battery, brand new battery, 4 shots on it. I just put it in. When this gets to 1 tick mark, you know that your battery life is coming to an end. Batteries do get tired. I will say they last for many years, but they do go bad. I just recently got rid of a couple of them because they finally couldn't really hold a charge. I would charge them up and they wouldn't really last that long. So I ordered a bunch of new batteries. Sensor cleaning. So we have a little filter that covers our sensor, and that filter will vibrate when we turn the camera off. There it is. It's vibrating. It's kicking these dust particles off. It can also happen when we turn the camera on if we tell the camera to. So we can turn this on. If it's on enable, it's going to happen every time you turn the camera on or off. And that's going to handle a lot of the dust particles. But what will happen is after a lot of shooting, eventually you'll see these dust specks. As a side note, make sure you point your camera down when you're changing your lenses. We want the sensor facing down so dust doesn't get inside it. Try to avoid changing lenses in windy conditions or dusty conditions. Try not to leave it exposed for prolonged periods. I have friends that just leave them wide open for weeks at a time. It drives me crazy. But there is dust constantly in the air that we're in. We can't see it. It's falling, and you want to keep your sensor as clean as possible. The auto cleaning mechanism is going to handle most of it, but every once in a while, you're going to have a very stubborn dust speck, and I will show you how to clean your cameras on the crash course. That lesson alone will pay for the crash course because I'll show you the right product to get, and I will show you how to do it with confidence so you don't have to send it into a camera cleaner or anything of that nature, and the rest is bonus. You will make your money on that video 10 times over during the life of your camera. So we've turned off the mode guide, we've turned off the feature guide. The help text is small, but if you want it to be larger, which probably should, turn it to standard. We have our viewfinder display where we can show an electronic level looking through the viewfinder. We can have a grid display if we want, and we can also have our flicker indicator if it's turned on. So if we turn on our electronic level, you'll see it in the bottom left-hand corner in the viewfinder. So these are all different things that we can turn on if you want to see them. Information button display options. So by pushing the information display button, do you want to see the electronic level? If you don't want to see it, we can turn that on, and then we have our black cue screen. Most everyone I know loves the electronic level. There it is. Then we have our HDMI resolution. So when we're feeding this out to a monitor, do you want it to auto detect what it should play at or at a standard 1080? We also have HDMI HDR output that if we turn this on, the idea is that we can get HDR video. I have tested it out. I have not had great results with it, but if I find something different, I will talk about that on the crash course. I have an Atomos Ninja 5 that I use a lot. It's a great teaching tool, but that is the idea of this, that we can get HDR, HDMI out video. And unfortunately, we also have that same problem with whether live view is engaged or not. I think it's really confusing. So don't feel bad if you notice this. So I'm not in live view right now. press this, now I'm in live view. I come back into that same menu page, and you'll notice that it's changed. It's a little, we lost something in here, right? So just keep that in mind, is that menu items are going to be there or not, depending on what shooting mode we're in. If I come back out, there it is. It's the viewfinder display. That kind of stuff drives me crazy, you know, but I'm trying to show you the one that has the more menu options. Coming to page number 5 in the yellow tab, the multifunction lock is right here. You engage it by flipping it up just a little bit. And the idea on this is that we can lock certain features and settings by using this switch, and we can determine what those settings are in here. It can be our primary selector, our main dial. It can be our secondary selector. It can be the joystick. It can be our directional pad, and it can be our touch screen. You can designate which ones you want it to lock. So if you bump it, doesn't matter, hit OK. Lock is on, right? Let's come into a shooting mode. We rotate this thing, and it's telling us that it's locked. That's the idea of it. Custom shooting modes. Up on top on our mode dial, you'll see this C1 and C2. Those are your custom modes. And the way this works is you may be a certain type of shooter where you like certain settings for landscape shooting. And you might like some other settings for portraits, including your shooting mode, your ISO, your picture styles, all those things. You know, you can dial them all in just the way you like them. And when you get it all set up, you can come into register settings. You can choose which setting you want it to save under. We'll choose C1. And that will save all those settings to C1. So the next time you're doing your landscape shoot, instead of redialing all your settings, you just flip the mode dial over to C1. And now you're doing your portrait shoot. Now you just flip that over to C2. And it saves you the time of needing to dial in all those settings over and over again. We can clear those settings, and we can also turn on auto update, which means that if we change those settings while we were in those modes, it will remember them as long as the dial is pointed to C1 or C2. Not a fan of that, so I'm going to leave that on disable. Really great feature. We have the ability to clear all of our camera settings. Copyright information. I can enter my name, Michael Andrew. I can also enter in my copyright, maybe the date, Michael Andrew Photography, 2019, 2020, and that will embed that metadata into the file. So every file that I take, it'll have my name, it'll have my copyright. It's pretty straightforward. You're just going to, you know, type your name in, say MM, we'll hit OK. We can also display what this is. There it is. Pretty cool feature if you're a professional, something I would recommend doing. If you want to download the manual for the camera, there's the URL, there's the QR code. You can download it. Some of them are very long. I think this one's 300 or 400 pages long. But the idea of the video you're watching is so you don't have to download that manual. I think this is a lot easier and a lot more informative, but that's just me. Certification logo display, this doesn't do anything. This just designates certain certifications required, I guess, by law. Which brings us to the orange tab. And these are the customizations. There's 3 different sets, one for exposure, one for autofocus, and one for operation of the cameras, as well as other features. The truth of the matter is, I only change a couple in custom function 2, and almost all of them deal with the optical focusing systems. So when I teach that lesson separately, I will come in and I will show you which ones to change. The truth of the matter is, yeah, most of these are pretty straightforward. You're going to, you know, deal in 1/3 stop increments, for example, when you're changing your exposure settings. Same thing with our ISO settings. Do you want to change it by 1/3 or 1/2 stop increments? Bracketing. So most of these, the default setting is pretty good. If you wanted to have more bracketed shots, you can change it in here. The safety shift, I don't really recommend messing with it. Exposure compensation, auto cancel if you want it to turn off every time you use it. We can have our auto exposure lock meter after certain modes. For the most part, those are going to be by default best for beginners. Autofocus, there are a couple things in here. I will talk about these more on the crash course. We can change our autofocus tracking sensitivity, the acceleration and deceleration of the tracking. the point switching when we're tracking. Most of these have to do with using the optical focusing systems. A lot of good stuff in here. Release, yeah, I leave that there. We're going to go into a lot more depth on these on the crash course. We can determine our focusing clusters, things of that nature. But let's see, direct focus point, which is amazing. I like to use the autofocus select button. Some of these are pretty useful, and we'll talk about them. 10 and 13 are the ones I usually tweak. All this is when you rotate the camera up, it remembers the focusing square you used the last time in that orientation. So if you wanted them to be remembered separately, you would come in here and you would select that. And this one, all it does is allow you to move your focusing square through the side, so you can go left, 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 and it'll jump all the way around to the right. Pretty straightforward. Hit OK. And the rest of them, there's some good ones. The VF display, if you want it to illuminate, just turn it on enable, otherwise it'll wait until it's dark. And this last one, micro adjustment, I would say don't mess with this. This is designed to correct lenses or camera bodies that are misfocusing. It's something that as an advanced shooter you would probably notice if your focus is off, and there's a way to come in and actually tweak that. Custom function 3, there's not a lot in here. We have the warning in the viewfinder. We can reverse the direction for our primary selector. We have our custom buttons, which we saw already in the cue screen. We can retract the lens when the power turns off for certain lenses. And then we have audio compression, which by default is turned to enable. So that's really it for the custom functions. There's not a lot in there to change that I would recommend. We could also clear all of our custom functions, which brings us to, finally, the My Menu tab, my favorite tab. We have covered a ton of different menu items, but the truth of the matter is you're probably only going to use a handful of them. The My Menu tab allows us to select and organize specific menu items that we want easy, fast access to, so we don't have to go through this whole menu. So the way this works is we're going to add a My Menu tab. This will be tab 1. I call this the tab, I call this the page. But you can see that we have a page in here, and we're going to select items to register, and we can scroll through the entire deep menu and find things that we want to add. One of which, this is what I most commonly do, is the format is something that I almost always have in my My Menu. Why? Because it's the one I use the most. So we'll just keep coming up. There it is, format card. We're going to add that. And another one, let's just say image quality. That's another good one. We'll just hit OK on that one. As an example, those are the two I want. We can sort them. So if I want format memory card to be after image quality, I'd hit OK, come back out. When I come to my menu tab, now I have image quality and format memory card. Those are the two I use more than anything in the menu. I obviously can add as many as I want. I can add multiple pages. If I didn't like those, I could come in here and delete selected items. I could delete all of them. I could delete that entire page. I can rename the tab if I wanted to. You can call it, let's call it Q. My Menu Q. Let's just call it, let's get rid of all that. We'll just call it Q for the quick deep menu. There it is, Q. How nice is that? And that's the page right there. You can see it. If we wanted to add another one, we could do so as well. So that is the My Menu tab. Very useful when you get used to shooting and you're using, certain menu items over and over again. You don't want to go digging for them. Set it up. One more quick side note I need to point out. If by chance you decide to rebel and turn your camera to the dummy mode, the A mode, I don't want to hear from you. I do not want to get an email from you asking me where the rest of the tabs went. In the dummy mode, the camera is assuming that, you're not into all these other options. Okay, so that's the most common question I get about the menu systems is where are all these extra tabs? Well, it's because your camera's on the dummy mode. If you turn it back to program, aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual mode, those tabs will return. So in any event, that is a quick overview of the deep menu systems. I will cover it in far greater depth, as well as many of these extra features on the crash course. I want to give you some warnings, because if you are a beginning photographer, you may be steered in the wrong direction, purchasing things that you may not need or want. The most important accessory after the camera, of course, is going to be the memory card. You are going to want to invest just a little bit of money and get a class U3 memory card. It is going to allow your camera to write those 4K videos at sustained data rates. If you put any junky memory card into your camera will not perform to its highest capability. And by the way, I'll put all these links in the description. Everything I'm about to talk about, we'll put those down below, so just check them out. Second thing I want to point out is that when you purchase your camera, the camera store, or whoever it is, the website, they may try to push UV filters on you. Do not buy UV filters. They do not do anything. Nobody has ever been able to show me a difference, a before and after difference in terms of what it does for the image, because digital sensors already filter out UV light. This is an upsell. It's modern day snake oil. Do not buy UV filters. One of the most important accessories that you're going to need is a tripod. And I know many of you are on a budget. You can spend as much as $500 or $600 on a good tripod. For me, the important thing is that it's sturdy and strong, and it has a locking ball head with a metal release plate. And because of this, I do not recommend the cheap, flimsy tripods that you can buy at Walmart for $50 or $60. Take that money and invest it into a good quality tripod that will at least give you several years of use. I have sourced one of these tripods. It's going to save you a lot of money, compact, small. When you're ready to upgrade, take a look at the Bogen Manfrotto carbon fiber legs. I think they run about $300 just for the legs, and then you can swap out different heads on top of the tripod. Let's talk about lenses real quick. Something that's absolutely critical to keep in mind is that we have an APS-C sensor on the Canon 90D. What that means is it's a little bit smaller than a full frame 35 millimeter digital sensor. And because of this, we have a multiplication factor on all of the lenses that we use, and that factor is 1.6. What this means is that if we use a 100 millimeter lens on our 90D, it is going to behave in terms of a focal length, field of view, as a 160 millimeter lens. So it's always important to keep that crop factor in mind. Something else that I have to point out that is absolutely critical is to keep in mind that some lenses are designed for the crop sensor, and these are referred to as EFS lenses. On Canon lenses, you'll know it when you see the little white dot. That white dot does not exist on the full frame lenses. The other set are referred to as EF lenses, electronic focus. Those are made for both full frame as well as APS-C lenses. As a side note, because I know some of you will end up getting a full frame camera, I did it for years. I had an APS-C in a full frame. You cannot use EFS lenses on full frame cameras. There's a little part, the back part of the lens that will hit the mirror. So just keep that in mind. And the reason why I go into all this is because you're going to have a buying strategy. When I started shooting full frame, I didn't want to carry two sets of lenses. I just wanted one set. And so I upgraded all my lenses to full frame, not a problem. If you are just getting started and you're on a budget, the kit lens is going to be great for now as you're learning your system. The 18 to 55, there's also an 18 to 135. Many of you probably got that lens with your purchase. You're probably going to want a telephoto zoom for something like sports shooting or birds in flight. Take a look at Canon's 70 to 300 millimeter or the 55 to 250. Sometimes those are sold in kits as well. For outdoor shooting in the daytime, they're going to be a great start. If you're looking for a wide angle lens, something for vlogging and things of that nature, maybe landscape shooting, take a look at the 10 to 18 f4.5 to 5.6. That's a really affordable, light, small lens. It's very versatile. So those lenses in the beginning are great. If you have unlimited money and you're looking for some very high-end lenses, you're looking at the Canon Holy Trinity. It's the 16 to 35 2.8, The 24-70 2.8 version 2 lives on my Canon DSLRs. That's the lens that I use 80 to 90% of the time. In the 70-200 2.8, and there's different versions of each of those. Having said all that, one EF lens I would definitely recommend is Canon's 50mm 1.8. It's a wide aperture. It's going to behave as an 80mm focal length, which is great for portraits. That's almost a no-brainer because it gives you the ability to shoot portraits. It's also a low light lens. It's very small, it's very light, and it's very affordable. Sigma has an amazing 18-35 1.8. It's very sharp, a little bit more expensive, a little bit wider. Tamron has a bunch of great lenses. There's just so much I can't even cover them. But in the beginning, go for those kit lenses that I mentioned. They're more affordable, and if you're looking to save even more money, take a look at eBay because people sell them there all the time. If you're serious about video shooting, you're going to want to get an onboard microphone. The one built into the camera is not the best. Plus, when you're handling the camera, the vibrations and the motors, that noise tends to get picked up by the built-in microphone. An outside microphone, like the ones made by Rode, are typically really good to get started. And again, you can find a lot of these used on eBay. If you found this video helpful and you want to learn more about your Canon 90D in real-world shooting situations, get the basics of photography, check out my Canon 90D crash course. That link is in the description. I thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.